Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's session on off-grid solar ecosystem. Let's think about people, money, technology, and policy. I would like to thank the International Solar Alliance and the Clean Energy Solutions Center who facilitate this webinar series. Some background from me. Before I joined F-Factor in 2010, I have been Director for Policy and Finance at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. I was responsible for the design of the Access to Energy Work Program in the agency. Previously, as a Spanish civil servant, I have been involved in many national and European regulations for the promotion of renewable energies and energy efficiency. In this lecture, we are looking at off-grid solar through an ecosystem perspective, trying to understand the key elements that determine the viability of success of the sector. In this lecture, we will, as always, start with a brief description and definition of what solar off-grid means, and afterwards jump into the main body of the presentation. Don't forget, at the end of the presentation, you will be given the chance to test your knowledge with a little quiz. The learning objective of which this module aims to provide will consist of an introduction to the ecosystem perspective on solar off-grid, as well as more tailored insights on the individual components of solar off-grid ecosystem. As such, we will have a look at how are policies and regulations to be designed, what are challenges around financing, what are viable business models, how does technology development, innovation happen, why do we need human resource development, capacity building, where can we find and use cross-sector linkages. The off-grid solar sector has evolved and expanded substantially since 2010. At that time, the market was characterized by low awareness and a limited geographical presence, mainly in Sub-Saharan Africa and India. In 2017, the sector by no means can be regarded as marginal anymore, with over 360 million people benefiting from off-grid solar technologies. However, the market remains highly dynamic, and it has to be understood as such. It is therefore important to take into consideration the complexity of factors and drivers that continue to shape it. This lecture explores the core of this market, the ecosystem in which the industry is rooted. The main body of this lecture is divided into two parts. We will start by looking at the off-grid solar ecosystem as a whole and then focus on the individual parts. Let's start off with understanding what we mean by ecosystem. Off-grid renewable energy solution will play a central role in countries' strategies to achieve universal electricity access in a timely and sustainable manner. The development opportunity is immense, but it requires targeted efforts to create an environment that enables scale up. These targeted interventions are part of an integrated framework of interrelated components, the ecosystem. In order to make off-grid solar solution a viable option, all components of the ecosystem require strengthening. The foundations for accelerating off-grid renewable energy deployment comprise dedicated policies and regulations, enabling institutional frameworks, customized business and financing models, and adapted technology solutions. This should provide the basis for service providers to access the market, deploy off-grid technologies, and contribute to market development. Complementary efforts are also needed to build adequate capacity across the value chain and identify cross-sector linkages to further enhance the sustainability of interventions. As illustrated in this figure, when all these elements come together, deployment can be accelerated in a manner that maximizes socioeconomic benefits. The underdevelopment or absence of functional ecosystem represents the root cause by the inability of social enterprises to scale. Loosely defined, the absence of an ecosystem includes limited availability of skilled human resources, high cost of capital for entrepreneurs, and limited access to affordable financing for end users, inadequate support to facilitate technology innovation for field application, limited access to comprehensive, reliable information on end users, and unsupportive existing policy environments that follow top-down approaches. Consequently, what is needed to facilitate the success of said social enterprises is to develop holistic approaches to strengthen the ecosystem in which they hope to thrive. While there was once a focus on technology alone as the key driver in the provision of the centralized renewable energy solution, its significance has reduced. The realization of how important the other aspects are in the provision of last-mile access to end-use households have made it important to consider a holistic approach, combining all aspects of the solar off-grid ecosystem. Over the following slides, we will be looking at the different features of this enabled environment in more detail, starting with the issue of designing dedicated policies and regulations for the off-grid sector. The main body of this lecture is divided into two parts. We have started by looking by the off-grid solar ecosystem as a whole, and then now we are focusing in individual parts. National rural electrification strategy need to be backed by dedicated and stable policy and regulatory frameworks. Traditional electricity sector frameworks have to be adapted to support the deployment of off-grid solutions. Policies, including incentive structures, need to be designed for long-term sustainable market development. The participation of the private sector will be key to complement the electrification efforts by governments and development agencies and to sustain scale-up deployment. To enable this, a robust policy and regulatory environment is needed to reduce investment risk, improve viability, and increase the overall attractiveness of the sector. Critically, the stability in policy is highlighted to be particularly important. For example, changes in taxation policy when in structural changes and can dramatically alter the economics of a technology and can lead to a slowdown in uptake. Additionally, adequate standards and quality control measures are important to avoid proliferation of low-quality systems and market spoilage. Renewable energy-based mini-grids are especially dependent on policy and regulations. The viability and sustainability of mini-grids largely depend on well-designed tariff regulations. One approach to setting the tariffs for private sector mini-grid is to impose a national uniform tariff, which, however, is often too low for sustainable operation and provides sufficient viability gap funding. Another approach is to allow mini-grid tariffs high enough to cover costs, but still well benefit current customers spending on conventional energy in off-grid areas. The private sector prefers minimal touch points with governments to improve efficiency and reduce transaction costs. By bringing greater regulatory certainty, clearly defining institutional roles and responsibility, investment risk for mini-grids can be reduced. The ultimately arrival of the national grid may introduce major uncertainty for the long-term viability of mini-grids. If defined ahead of time, interconnection and all compensation mechanisms allow risks associated with main grid arrival. Even where interconnection provision exists, tariffs for the interconnected mini-grids need to be set at levels that allow for sustainable operations. If you are interested in learning more about mini-grid policy design, please see our respective webinars on the topic. Finally, what we need to take away: the policy and regulatory landscape for off-grid is highly dynamic as government introduce dedicated measures, gain experience, and incorporate lessons towards the creation of a more effective framework for market development. This is essential to adapt to local conditions and address specific deployment barriers. Tanzania constitutes an interesting example of how a positive and advancing regulatory framework for off-grid solar could look like. Tanzania has taken measures for greater private sector involvement in the mini-grid sector, such as standardized power purchase agreement to cut down negotiation time between regulators and developers, annual tariff adjustments to address macroeconomic changes in the country, such as imposed through variation in the exchange rate or inflation, segmented licenses, such that projects below 1 megawatt do not require a license, only registration of site. Projects under 100 kilowatt are exempted from tariff regulation, as well as technology-specific tariffs as offered under the second generation of Tanzania Small Power Producer Program. This is an example of how diligently designed regulation can stimulate private market engagement. The core aspect of building the financial link in the ecosystem involves an interest from financiers and investors to provide access to credit, which in turn requires focused capacity building. Factors usually identified as concerns are represented in this figure. These include concerns of grassroots entrepreneurs with no formal business training, as well as those with better educational qualifications and detailed business plans. As postulated by the ecosystem approach, these issues need to be overcome quarterly, otherwise the sector is unlikely to develop. Let's look into the details. Low-cost debt financing primarily for working capital is a key need for entrepreneurs. However, this is often hard to access from banks for young and upcoming entrepreneurs with no established credit history. Interest rates with other financial institutions are high, and even with bank loans, moratorium periods are short, all of which make it economically infeasible for a newly established energy enterprise. Another critical concern is the difficulty in availing patient investment capital on account of high expectation of growth and internal rate of return for the impact investment community without considering the challenges of creating an ecosystem on the ground. In the case of end-user financing, on the other hand, the cost of finance, as for example from banks, microfinance institutions, or local financial institutions and collateral requirements may become prohibitive factors. Lack of willingness of financial institutions to finance for productive utilizations and application powered on the centralized renewable energy makes it difficult for households to move to application beyond basic lighting. Consequently, the challenges around financing in the off-grid solar ecosystem have to be met with measures which strengthen financial capacities and foster the development of innovative financing schemes. With respect to capacity building, experience in parts of India has shown that undertaking workshops and meetings with financiers to bank myths about the technology and the engagement of former bankers who have actively financed the sector before to discuss the means of reducing of mitigation risk, innovation in financing, promoting financing of newer, productive uses technology is critical in convincing new financial channels and institutions. For regions where the banking channel is not active, efforts are required towards either revitalizing this or capitalizing on alternate financial institutions. Similar rigor is capacity building and sensitization is critical when it comes to investment in these enterprises. This is a need to convince investors on the importance of patient capital and push back on the nature of due diligence processes and investment conditions when they do not take note of realities on the ground. Regarding new innovative financing schemes, the use and adoption of innovative financing mechanisms that reduce the risk of bankers, increasing access to loans and improve credit conditions for entrepreneurs are essential in bolstering the financing link. Where the basic financing model is unavailable due to the high risk settings, increase in financial institution confidence can be achieved by facilitating innovations like loan guarantees and interest subsidies using soft funds. This can be common where customers have low ability to pay or where communities are migrant or illegal or lack land titles and collaterals. Similarly, In the case of entrepreneurs, there is a need for more work on structuring working capital debt, allowing for lower rates of interest and a reasonable moratorium period. While there are also a number of governments and bank schemes in countries to provide this sort of credit, very little is known about their utilization for the energy sector. In emerging markets, microfinance institutions have successfully partnered with solar home service companies to bundle home solar systems with microfinance loans. While this did not initially result in increased energy access across most countries, the introduction of pay-as-you-go or rent-to-own payment plans and improved mobile payments technology has drastically reduced barriers. This is an example of innovative consumer finance solution, which will also in the future continue to shape the sector. Microfinance institutions, on the other hand, are already quite established finance instruments, but one that exemplifies how financing can be approached more holistically. An interesting example is provided by the Netherlands Development Organization's work in Cambodia. SNB is a not-for-profit international development organization from the Netherlands. In Cambodia, they took up the challenge of fostering the adoption of solar solutions. Main barriers included a lack of customer trust in solar, low consumer awareness of the benefits of solar, limited last-mile distribution by solar firms, a lack of financing schemes, limited business management and technical skill among solar staff, and poor sector coordination and policy framework. SNB implements technical assistance programs in Cambodia that aims to catalyze the development of a sustainable local off-grid solar energy industry to improve energy access for rural households. Among other things, to tackle the market barrier of affordability, the program collaborates with 4 lending microfinance institutions with extensive branch and credit agent networks in rural Cambodia to allow customers to buy solar home systems in installments. Also, the program operates a private sector result-based incentive fund that offers solar companies a cash reward for each solar product installed that complies with the program's quality standard and is financed with a loan from an MFI partner. In this way, both the energy entrepreneur needs and the end user needs are integrated in the design of a support scheme. We now jump to a related component of the off-grid solar business model, the business model through which the service of product is sold profitably. A strong business case can be made for off-grid renewable energy solution, whether for an electrified rural household, industry, or existing fossil fuel-based installations. A sustainable operational model should be in place so that customers continue to receive reliable services. In identifying the right business models, a consumer-driven, bottom-up approach is preferred for rapid deployment of off-grid renewable energy solutions, as it allows greater interaction and learning opportunity for both private sector and the community. This gives the private sector the flexibility and the ability to adapt its technical and business model as required. For mini-grids, offtake risk and revenue generation remain key risks for off-grid renewable energy operators. In the case of a standalone system, this risk has been addressed in part through innovation in business models and metering technology, for example, through pay-as-you-go systems. In some cases, the energy service itself mitigates the offtake risk as it creates an environment for increased productive activities. For mini-grids, one way to mitigate the offtake risk is to enter into a PPA with anchor clients, such as telecommunication towers, rural health centers, and water supply, or by diversifying revenue generation and by participating in shared value partnerships where excess energy from commercial sites could be supplied to surrounding communities. Public-private partnership can play a crucial role in enabling the participation of the private sector. A model for a scalable approach could be partnership with rural electrification agency-like bodies, wherein the agency provides infrastructure and the private sector is responsible for power generation plant. But the business model ecosystem component is also closely linked to the finance component. High-risk innovation capital is required to drive deployment of business models and technologies, allow learning by doing, and encourage bottom-up sector development. It is important to foster innovation partnership, including incubators, to stimulate local innovation and to strengthen capacity to access finance. So, what is the pay-as-you-go model about? Business operators and especially business profitability of off-grid renewable energy businesses are limited by the bankability of their potential customer base. Rural households often lack the collateral and the financial power to obtain solar systems. The traditionally required upfront investment is deemed unaffordable. A prominent business model adaptation meant to overcome this issue is pay-as-you-go financing. A pay-as-you-go company essentially rents consumers a solar home system that comes with a battery, a charge controller, a solar panel, LED bulbs, and a mobile charger. Basic systems have enough power to charge phones and lights, and larger ones could power small appliances like radios or TV. The first approaches of this business model were tested already in 2010 in Eastern Africa, and since then, the concept has developed into a continuously growing worldwide industry. Put very simple, in the pay-as-you-go approach, customers pay only for the electricity they use, plus small installments pay on the go for the hardware, most often through mobile money infrastructure. The hardware in the solar device regulates usage, disabling the energy services when the customer prepaid use is used up or expires. Under some pay-as-you-go models, the device permanently unlocks at the end of the lease period and ownership is transferred to the end customer. Difference along the financing model spectrum will be discussed in a minute. Today, there are issues with technology innovation on many different fronts. While research continues into improving panel technology and reducing costs significantly, improvements in battery technology, which have a clear bearing on the centralized renewable energy system, have still not made enough progress to warrant a steady local supply in underserved regions at affordable cost. Similarly, improving efficiency and innovating on DC products such as televisions, motors, pumps has been limited, ultimately affecting the end user ability to access additional productive use and household appliances, certainly in some parts of the world. In cases where innovation is occurring, there are hardly any standards for comparison of products to determine the working under field conditions. Often quality assurance is lacking on these newer efficient technologies, and manufacturers make claims based purely on in-house testing of products. This, however, is insufficient in a sector where end use happens in a completely different set of circumstances that are often difficult to predict. Hence, there is no way around field testing. Such testing is often resource and time intensive for individual enterprises and can easily eat into the revenue streams of an enterprise. In order to address these issues, a great trust is required to field testing of off-grid appliances, in addition to existing lighting solutions for faster implementation in rural and urban poor communities to facilitate movement of households up to the energy ladder. There must be a greater thrust on bringing this solution to higher energy access tier levels with supportive financing for small entrepreneurs. Centralized research and development and quality assurance specifically for this sector would be a move in the right direction. As we can see, there are direct links both to the ecosystem components of finance and regulation required in order to facilitate this development. Especially finance is once more important. Flexible financial resources and soft funding should be allocated to developing research facilities that can further build sustainable models. For example, through field-based testing and pilot programs in a specific context for decentralized renewables, energy, as well as energy efficiency. This can also be made possible through initiatives of bilateral and multilateral agencies. Capacity building and vocational training is key to increase sustainability of projects and programs and generate greater socioeconomic impact. These need to be integrated into off-grid renewable energy initiatives and designed for different stakeholders in the sector, including end users, enterprises, financial institutions, and policymakers. The need for skilled human resources in the sector is large and so far has not been fully addressed. While the sector is still nascent, it is critical to address the development of human resources at all organizational levels for renewable energy enterprises: operations, sales and marketing, finance, servicing, research and development, and community involvement. Decentralized energy programs often lack rural project implementers with local level presence. Further, there seems to be little availability of appropriate skilled human resources at the local level. Building up this capacity is difficult. This time and resource-intensive need is currently being met daily by the entrepreneurs who are already stretched for resources. Individual organizations are forced to invest in the most basic skill training. To reduce the cost of training and skill development incurred by individual entrepreneurs, there must be a thrust on creating curriculum and teaching modules for training of renewable energy technicians, operators, and micro-entrepreneurs. For example, in a country like India, the existing industrial training institutes and rural development and self-employment training institute in rural areas and semi-urban areas can then be utilized to disseminate these courses at the local level and build manpower on the ground. The capacity development ecosystem goes beyond the training of technicians, salesmen, or the raising of awareness in community. What has been touched on before is the critical need to also make finance personal reach and understanding and appraisal of what the off-grid solar sector is and how it works. There is a direct link between the ecosystem component and finance and capacity. The off-grid electrification sector touches various aspects like health, climate change, education, and job creation. As a result, deploying off-grid renewables helps to achieve the SDG 7, while also contributing to several other SDGs, including those related to poverty alleviation, health, water, nutrition, and climate. Policymakers across sectors should integrate off-grid renewables as a pillar for development, thereby facilitating achievement of the SDGs. The decentralized and modular nature of renewables allows them to cater to local energy demands in areas not served by the main electrical grid, supporting rural communities as they move up the energy ladder. Off-grid renewables can also be tailored to different applications in sectors such as health and agriculture. The left side of this table presents off-grid renewable in the role for agriculture. Agriculture and agri-food-related activities are the share of rural economy. Therefore, growth in the agriculture sector is among the most effective ways for poverty alleviation. Introducing off-grid renewable energy technologies along different stages of the agri-food chain to deliver affordable, secure, and environmentally sustainable energy can boost productivity, reduce losses, and increase resilience to climate variability. The right side of the table introduces the role of off-grid renewables for healthcare. Many health facilities in rural settings continue to operate without electricity. Furthermore, facilities with access often have an unreliable supply. Diesel generators were used struggle with both high fuel cost and unreliable fuel delivery. This lack of access to reliable energy contributes to the healthcare challenges developing countries face including high material death rates largely due to limited access to maternal and emergency obstetric care and running of vaccines due to poor cold chain services. Access to electricity plays a critical role in the functionality of healthcare facilities and the quality, accessibility, and safety of health services delivered to rural communities. Electricity is necessary to operate critically needed medical devices such as emergency surgical and diagnostic equipment, as well as to refrigerate vaccines, blood, and medicines. Electricity is also needed for the operation of basic amenities such as lighting, refrigeration, ventilation, and communication within the healthcare context. Without energy, many life-saving interventions simply cannot be undertaken. The effect of off-grid renewable energy manifests across sectors. When rural households receive solar home system or access to mini-grids, their quality of life is improved, and the extra hours of light and the time saved through the use of automated devices, as well as the access to information technology devices, may on their own be factors that also improve the saving and earning potential of household members. Also, larger systems that are used in community settings may have a wide range of positive effects on the members of the community, for example, as discussed before, through the provision of access to improved healthcare services. The productive use of energy can further and more directly provide economic opportunities. Customers may be able to improve their current economic activity or even start a new one after receiving access to electricity. Especially, solar home systems can often be obtained as bundled kits with so-called productive use appliances. A recent study by Google found that almost 60% of the solar home system customers undertake more economic activity due to their purchase of such systems. Of this, for 24% of solar home systems represent a vital component in their income generating activity, and for 7%, the solar home system enable a household members to get a new job. With a growing offer of productive use appliances, this development is likely to gain momentum, representing a promising pathway through which access to electrification can directly improve economic opportunities, livelihoods, and inclusive growth from within the community. Clearly, however, this will only work if the full off-grid solar ecosystem is intact. Concluding remarks. The off-grid solar ecosystem is a conceptual framework, but one that aids in understanding the dependencies of the sector and in the context. The components of the ecosystem are all important, and intervention can leverage synergies between them. Fully promoting all components of the ecosystem can drastically improve not only SDG 7, but also contribute to poverty alleviation, health improvements, and economic development. And with this, we arrive at the end of this lecture on ecosystem. I would like to thank you for participating. Please remember to take the opportunity to test your knowledge through our little quiz.